working on planning and development of tiny homes. He's got all the details on the Ontario Building Code and how it applies to tiny homes. So if we can give a round of applause and we'll get started.
Thanks very much. So I'll try and make this presentation on Ontario Building Code as interesting as I possibly can, but I promise it might be a bit technical, we might need some information, but I think that's what you're here for. So my name is Massecar. I'm a former building official, worked for the City of Kitchener, City of Guelph, as well as an independent consultant for some time. And now I run NW Drafting and Design, work with Ontario Tiny Homes and owner of suite builders, specializing in construction of site-built ADUs, tiny homes, things like that. So the agenda for today, I mainly want to talk, we could talk for hours about all the intricacies of building code application to tiny homes and ADUs, but mainly I want to touch on some of the things that people get tripped up on the most, or things that maybe you see on TV or Pinterest, Instagram, and you think that looks really cool. I try to kind of explain how that's actually applicable to the current regulatory environment. At the end, I might talk about a little bit about the future, what we can hopefully expect for code changes, and I'll leave a lot of time for questions. I try to condense this and leave time for Q&As. People tend to have a lot of questions about this topic. So the size of areas and spaces, a lot of people wonder, like, how small can we make a tiny home? What are minimum size requirements? Can I have a 2-bedroom? Can I have a loft? All those kind of things. So tiny homes are tiny. They can be quite small. Building code allows for 145 square feet floor area plus a bathroom. So that usually works out to about 188 square feet. That's usually where you find that number from. Designer can get kind of creative into how that might look, but as you can see here, this is an example of a very compact plan that would be code compliant. The smallest 1-bedroom unit would include 193 square foot combined kitchen, living, dining room, a bathroom, which again has no defined area, but just there has to be space for one. And the bedroom is 95 square feet plus a closet, so fairly compact, small space. Usually during tiny home design, this is the one kind of area that we usually get tripped up on because people want smaller bedrooms. You don't really need like a big bedroom, you can spot for a bed, maybe a Murphy that pulls down, not a lot of floor space. So what we have been seeing a lot to get around that minimum room size requirement is a combination, which I'll talk about in a second, or an alternative solution to permit a smaller bedroom. So something like that is possible. You talk to your designer about that. A smallest 2-bedroom, this is where things start getting a bit big. This is where you're getting into, if it's a modular home, and it must be a CSA 8277 approved modular home, or a site-built home. A home that's a 2-bedroom isn't really going to be built under the 2-stage permit approach, which I'll talk about a couple slides there. We've got 225 square foot combined space, 95 square foot for your primary unit, and 65 square feet for a secondary bedroom. So talking about our combination space, as you can see here, we have a wall opening between the bedroom and the living room. If you have a 40% opening in a wall, they're considered combined spaces by code. So this is where we, a lot of times, are able to provide like a 1-bedroom-esque feeling, but still providing that open concept. And we do have people later maybe coming back and putting like a sliding bar door on it or something like that after the building inspector goes home. Discussion on stairs and tiny homes. So again, getting back to the whole Pinterest, Instagram thing, you see a lot of lofts, ladders, things like that. In a home built to Ontario building code, a ladder loft is not something that's permitted. Basically, you have to comply with the OPC requirements for stairs. So 10-inch tread, which is fairly large, so like you're just using so much space in a small home for a set of stairs to get to a higher level. The building code does permit spiral stairs, so this is an example of what you could get with a code compliant spiral stair and call it a loft, or it's a second story. The other note too that I forgot to mention at the beginning real quick is I will be sharing a copy of this slideshow on my website, OntarioTinyHomePlans.ca, and you can check us out at the booth that's right behind there, scan QR code taken to the website. So there's a bunch of text in here too, but you can download that slideshow as well, so that you're not worried about having to read all the little fine print out here. Yeah, it's OntarioTinyHomePlans.ca. Ontario Tiny Home Plans. Yep. And again, we're right behind the booth there too. If you didn't get that, you need to check us out. So I'm going to discuss site servicing. That's usually something that is a challenging topic. It's a challenging from a construction standpoint, and it's really challenging for a prospective person that's looking to put like an ADU in their backyard or build a tiny home to wrap their heads around just the cost. You know, you put a lot of money into something that's just going to be in the ground. Oh, there we go. Okay. So talking about sewers, and I know there was a question earlier about state servicing, so we'll definitely answer all your questions about options. So if you live in town, if there's municipal services on your road, zoning bylaws is going to require you to connect to those services, either through the main dwelling or directly to the main, depending on how the zoning bylaws are written. You're not going to be able to put in a incinerating toilet or a septic system or anything like that if you're on municipal services that require you to connect. It may change in the future, who knows, but I doubt it. I just don't see that being a big thing that they're too worried about making a change on. So for sewers, like I said, we've got a gravity connection to the main, gravity connection to the house, and this is where the building code provides a bit of a gray area that municipalities either go to one side or the other on. The code does not permit you to connect services from one dwelling unit through another dwelling unit. So thinking about it logically, if you have a problem in your tiny home backyard, they don't want the plumber to have to get access through someone else's house to like fix your plumbing or something like that. There are some exemptions for that if in a stacked condos, for example, you have one unit on top of another, but that's what it says in the building code. Municipalities will take that little definition and go with it, where some may say, I understand it says that in the code, however, we're going to allow people to connect in the main house. Often this is a bit cheaper of an approach, because then you're not dealing with longer connection, things like that. Some considerations when you are running services you're going to use. Big thing is frost protection. So obviously services have to be below ground. What happens when you come up into the ADU, which might be on piers or a concrete slab or something like that, like without a traditional basement. So it's important on the design side to make sure you're considering how those services are going to be protected from freezing. That is a building code requirement that inspectors are clearly looking for, and sometimes thought about if you're looking at just the physical building itself. Water supply is a big issue with putting an additional dwelling unit in, regardless of if it's detached or attached or inside the home. You're going to have to look at the water supply capacity for the house. So the building code permits a 3/4 inch water supply to serve one dwelling. Now a lot of people have older homes where it's like maybe a 5/8 supply, or maybe you have a pretty recently built home that's still a 3/4 inch. The problem that you're going to experience is the moment you go to 2 dwellings on that property, you're going to have at least a 1 inch water service. Maybe even 1.25 inches, maybe with more dwellings, like 3, like a triplex, something like that, may even require up to 1.25 inches. So this upgrade is going to be on the owner's responsibility to make sure that it's serviced. And this usually has a pretty steep cost to it. And the answer is it depends on what that cost is. It could be a few $1,000s, it could be tens and tens of thousands of dollars to do that upgrade, depending on what the infrastructure is like on the road, all those kind of variables. So it's very important to, when discussing with the builder, make sure you're discussing the site servicing piece, like if they have a plan for it, if you're dealing with a builder or designer, because it's very important to get these numbers and variables in mind before you kind of get too far into the process to make sure that your budget's covering those costs. On the rural side, a well is obviously pretty much the only option for a cistern. The nice thing is, on the rural side, you could put a cistern in if you wanted to. There's no like code requirements about not letting you put a cistern in or anything like that. So you put a cistern in to service it, or if your well can have that capacity, you can run off the existing well in the house. You don't have to worry about upgrading pipe sizes and things like that. So we're going to talk about septic systems briefly. So a class 1 septic system, a great example is the Cinderella toilet people out there. The incinerating toilet is considered a class 1 system. Earth pit privy, those kind of outhouse, those are class 1 systems So those are usually permitted in rural areas. The code specifically allows it. Sometimes you have to have a real conversation with the municipality to make sure they're okay with it, but it should be permitted because it is permitted in building code. A class 2 system is for gray water. So when you have something like a Cinderella toilet, you still have to deal with gray water. So your water from like your sinks, your showers, things like that, they can't obviously pass through the Cinderella toilet. So that has to be dealt with a small septic system on site called a gray water system. There's no currently any alternative to this that can permit it. The only thing would be a holding tank, and that's only permitted with the chief building official's permission, and it's usually only if the site just cannot provide for a proper septic system. So if you have like poor soils or there's site restrictions or things like that, then a holding tank agreement would be an option. The last thing to talk about with the septic real quick there is, again, when you're looking at putting an ADU or tiny home on rural property, and you're having something housed in a septic system, it is important to understand that 99% of the time you're going to be upgrading that septic system. Pretty much never is there enough capacity for a whole other house, essentially. That's how it would be looked at. The building code, even though it's a small house, it still has all the fixtures, still has like 2 people living there, that kind of thing, possibly. So you're going to be looking at a septic system upgrade. Again, so many variables. You have to talk to your designer and contractor about what those costs would be. But yeah, again, it's usually in the tens of thousands for upgrades. You're just hearing lots about, the money that need to be spent on these things to make it doable. And it's unfortunate, but it's reality of working. So might as well just be aware of it and work with it and come informed when you're looking at getting this done. Offsite construction, I'll talk about it very briefly, but a lot of the builders out here are going to be very aware of the different options that are available to them, and depending on their approach, they're going to do it different ways. So you've got the traditional approach would be like an on-site construction. So that's what we do as suite builders. We just do on-site, we don't factory or anything like that, and it's just like building a regular home. They're just going to show up, build their house, pretty straightforward. The other option is an off-site construction. There's a couple different ways to do that. Building code permits buildings of a certain size to be built in one location and then transported and installed in another location. And again, depending on that size of the home, you can either do it just straight from the Ontario Building Code, get an inspector to show up, do the inspections, or it can be done through the 8277 standard, which is manufactured homes. So a lot of builders out there are doing it the 2-stage permit or the 8277. And the end result for both is a tiny home on property. It's really just up to the builder about kind of how they're going to go about it, but it's nice that that's available. The other option discussed is the park mobile trailers option, the CSAs at 240. There's a bit of a gray area here again where some municipalities accept homes built to that standard if like the wheels are removed and it's on a running foundation. Other municipalities just won't accept them if they're built to that standard at all. It's got to be an 8277 or a 2-stage tiny home or something built on site. But it is technically an option. It's recognized in the building code. If it's certified like an RV standard or something like that, you cannot get a building permit for it. There's no mechanism in legislation and regulation to allow a building permit presented for that. Yeah, this is just kind of a summary of the offsite. I recommend just downloading the slide. Obviously, there's a lot to read, so I don't need to go through the whole thing. This is all the 2-stage approach. It may be important for you if you're looking at a build to ask if they're using the 2-stage tiny home system or they're using 8277. If they're using the 2-stage approach, things might go very smoothly, but I would expect maybe some more delays on the permitting side. The builders that are using the 8277 have invested a lot of money in that process, and it is smoother from a permitting standpoint. There's less to deal with one municipality, not two. So there could be issues. I found a lot of municipalities aren't even aware you can do this 2-stage tiny home approach. We've applied for permits and we've said, what do you mean you can't do that? Give them the code reference and explain it to them. So if your builder runs up against those issues, you could have some hurdles there, but just have some grace because this is put into place to ultimately ultimately try and do it more affordably because there's more cost to that A277 approach. So there's trade-offs for the builder, and there's trade-offs for the customer. I would like to, leave a lot of time for questions in case there's questions, and if I have to fill some more time with just some more random building code facts, we can do that towards the end, but I'll start taking questions now. Yeah, I can talk about loft in general, so we'll talk about ceiling heights. So the minimum ceiling height, generally speaking, in like a living space is 7 feet in Ontario. A bedroom can be less. You can have a minimum, like at a knee wall, for example. Picture a traditional story and a half house, you have a little knee wall, it slopes up to the flat portion or a peak. So you can have 4 feet at a knee wall, and you can have 6'5", kind of at the minimum height there in a bedroom. So there are loft-esque designs that work, that fit that code requirement, but to meet OBC, it would be like a traditional tiny home loft bed where you're kind of crawling up into a space, like you'd more see like an RV standard or something like that. To talk a little bit about what we see as potential changes that are coming up in the future, we were expecting this year to be getting, back in March, a lot of building code changes. We were told there's going to be a bunch of stuff on tiny homes. It was very exciting. I was hoping to come here with an updated presentation and all this cool stuff you can do now, but nothing has happened. So all the provincial government did was do what they had to do in regards to harmonizing the building code a bit more with the national building code, and that's it. So it's all just hundreds of pages of administrative changes, nothing really functional this time. There may be some like little things in there, but nothing specifically to really aid the designer in providing more flexibility for tiny home design at this time. But they see it coming, and the government knows that this is a legitimate housing option. And as we've seen with the tiny home show like the last 3 years, more and more people are very interested in this as an approach. So I can see changes coming for sure. And I did talk to somebody in the ministry like 2 years ago, and they told me some of the changes that were coming. So I guess they're working on it. So maybe lofts in the future, maybe ladders, maybe things like that to provide some more flexibility. Any other questions?
Thanks very much for your presentation. I actually have 2 questions. One of them, last presentation they talked about Z240.2.1, I think, so what's the difference between that one and Z240?
Yeah, I don't know. I've asked CSA that exact question to understand it, and it seems to be that I'll tell you what I think is going on. I don't know if this is actually correct, so don't use this as gospel, but I believe when they talk in the code reference to the 2.1, they're referencing the structural portion of that standard to make sure that it meets structural requirements, wind uplift, things like that, so it doesn't like topple over the wind or anything. And then that's really what the building department is concerned about when they get the permit for that. I believe that's what it's doing, but then the problem is, again, this is an issue with municipalities not being aware of things. They just look at the paper, and your paper says Z240 building code says Z240.2.1. Those aren't the same, but I feel that they are. It's just a misunderstanding of what the building department is looking for.
Gotcha, thank you. And the other question was, can you go through the 2-stage process again?
Yeah, for sure. I got a little bit more time, I think, so I can delve into that a little bit more. But essentially, I'll just use cities as an example. It's easier to discuss that way. So I live in Norfolk County. Say I have a factory building tiny homes. I get a building permit in Norfolk County to build a tiny home. Say my customer you, say you live in Brantford. You want a tiny home built on your property in Brantford. Purchase it from me. I get a building permit in Brantford to install it in Brantford. So the Norfolk building inspectors inspected the factory, the Brantford building inspectors will inspect it in Brantford. They'll look at the site hookups, they'll look at the foundation, they'll look at the site servicing, those kind of things. That's essentially how it works in a nutshell without getting into the administrative paperwork that has to transfer and things like that.
Yes, I'm wondering, if I have a property and it's rural, and we'd like to add like a home on it, so can that tiny home have a like, talked about having a small septic, so it's allowed to have that.
That would be applicable to the specific zoning bylaw to regulate that. So I find that,
About the water too, like having a cistern.
yeah, like in my municipality, for example, we have to have at least water or septic connected to the main home. And I believe that would be to prevent, like, trying to sever and things like that in the future, because the intent of these homes is not to be like severed off and then have it like a separate ownership. So typically you would either have one common septic system for the ADU and the main house, or you might maybe connect to the same well or something like that, so that you keep those services somehow tied. But I directed questions specifically to the municipality, what they would recommend.
Can I give an example on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I live in a tiny home, I've talked to a couple of municipalities, and there are two that I drive through, and one zoning says you must have adequate waste management, and the other one right next door says you have to be tied into the main home. So even two townships that are right next to each other, the zoning bylaws are different. Yeah.
Just one utility that I don't really see mentioned, maybe it's not a big deal for a lot of people. An air exchange system, I know this is mandatory in modern homes, take construction, you need that air exchange. Are we finding that that's necessary in these small homes as well, to have those?
Yeah, great question, and I'm happy to get into the weeds for ventilation for sure. So ventilation, especially in a small home, is even more important than in a big home. You just have so much less air volume to work with, right? So the moment you start cooking or having a shower or even just breathing and living in a small space, you're producing so many more contaminants, so to make sure it's properly ventilated. And to get to the beginning of your question, all new dwellings in Ontario are required to have a heat recovery ventilator system, an ERV or HRV, there's some type of difference between the two, but you have to have it, there's no exemption. So any tiny home built to code, 8277, any of that, they require an HRV. Now, talking about ventilation rates in a small space, obviously we don't need like a big heat recovery ventilator that we would need in a 4,000 square foot house. So the problem we have is a lot of over-ventilation with the HRVs that provide the required efficiency. And I guess I should just real quick summarize what an HRV does, but it basically takes the stale air out of the house, brings in fresh air, and there's a heat exchanger core in the middle that takes some of that heat energy from the air leaving and putting it, just the energy back into the incoming airstream. The streams don't mix. It's like Ghostbusters, don't mix the streams. So this airstreams don't mix. You're not getting any contaminated air flowing back in. It is just like a heat exchanger core that's getting that air in. So when we talk about efficiency, what we're saying is how efficient that unit can recover that heat energy. So you're not, taking warm air and blasting it outside and blasting cold air in your house, which you definitely want to be thinking about, especially in a tiny home, because you might have the incoming duct like right there, so you don't want to have blowing cold air on you or anything like that. So that's what an HRV is. We have to make sure the ventilation rates in a tiny home are low enough that we're exhausting the air we need, but then we're not over ventilating the space, which can cause like very dry air. So in the winter time when you're like got a lot of static, it's very dry in your house, that's from over ventilation typically, because it's like just bringing all that really dry air from outside and taking the moist air out. So you're over ventilating the space, we don't want to do that. So there are small HRVs on the market, but unfortunately they typically don't meet the efficiency requirements, again, because they're small in size, small heat exchanger, they don't extract that heat energy efficiently, so they don't meet building code requirements for energy efficiency. So there are ways around that. There's different compliance options your designer can use, where you can like maybe use less efficient HRV, but like better windows, those kind of things. There's trade-offs available. So that would be really important to look at how the space would be ventilated. Ductless HRVs are a great technical option. Unfortunately, they're not technically accepted in the building code yet, because the building code standards for efficiency reference a ducted HRV. So there's no test mechanism that's recognized in the code for a ductless HRV, like a Luno system or something like that, which a lot of time was building. Not to say that those aren't used in Ontario. I've got a project where we use Lunos through an alternative solution approach, both are an option. So you see that in a home out there, it doesn't mean it's illegal, it just maybe means there's a different mechanism to do it, or who knows, maybe the municipality just wasn't aware of that code requirement, or somebody there talking about efficiency rates and ventilation rates.
I was just curious of how the city approaches taxes for a tiny home. Do they use a property tax for the whole place and then separate utility taxes, or?
Yeah,
How do they do that?
Great question. So basically how the municipal tax system works is obviously MPAC assesses your property and then you get tax rate based on the property assessment. So when you get a building permit for anything, pool, a deck, shed, whatever, you put on that application form what the cost of construction is. That number is reported to MPAC. So it's a direct, they run reports like monthly or whatever, and pull that data from the municipality. And that's usually where they'll strictly by increasing property value due to the construction, that's where they're gonna pull like additional basic assessment value to be able to like tax higher property taxes. Your question about utilities, that would be really dependent on how things are hooked up. So if you're just pulling water out one water meter that's in the main house, for example, you're just gonna still have one water bill that goes to the main house. Same with hydro, maybe it's a sub panel on a separate meter, that'd be the same thing. Sewer, obviously that just comes off the water bill. So it really depends on kind of where the water meter is, I would say, as to how that's done. There are devices you can get now which can privately meter water, privately meter hydro. Those kind of things are available if you're like looking at a situation where you've got a tenant, so you want to like kind of regulate what those are, but putting like an additional meter in. Those are options.
Back up to here.
Vote around incineration toilets in terms of sizing, like as per class 1 or class 4?
So it doesn't, in the building code, it won't specifically tell you what size you need for like incinerator toilet or class 1. It would just simply refer to the system. So it would be probably up to just generally complying with whatever standards it needs to comply with.
What certification look like if I was contemplating a self-built? Like, could I get purchase plans from you, for example? Could I build it myself, or does it have to go through?
Yeah, great question. So in Ontario, you are allowed to build your own home. You don't have to be a licensed builder to build it for yourself. So you can absolutely work off set plans and build it yourself. That's not a problem.
Would that be would you need it would be building permit though, right? Not any CSA certification?
Yes. Yeah, you definitely just be doing it our conventional building permit approach. Could even still be a two-stage, like you could build it for yourself somewhere else and move it. But one big thing to look out that two-stage issue is if you're doing it yourself or if you have a builder doing it, make sure that there's zoned for manufacturing or something like that, because that's the issue we had with applying for some two-stage permits, where maybe the builder was just building on rural property or something like that, and then we apply for a permit for a two-stage, and then it's like, well, that's great, building permit for the tiny home, not an issue. You can manufacture homes where you're intended to manufacture homes, so that kind of creates its own issue for the builder. But yeah, if there's just something else to come up. They want you to do like industrial labor and things like that that are zoned for manufacturing, so you're not getting beside somebody just like running mail for like 8 hours a day, right?
Impact does the evaluation, do they revalue the host house?
That's a great question. I think that's maybe getting into the weeds a little bit from my understanding of how those numbers are translated, but from my time in municipality, the way I understood it was they're just literally reporting like, hey, this address reported an extra $100,000, $200,000 in construction value, and then that just kind of gets reported in impact. I don't think it has anything to do with the building column lot or anything like that. That would be it. Municipality is definitely going to classify like the ADU as residential, so if you live in like a rural area where part of your property might be zoned, or not zoned, but as like on the impact assessment as a farm, obviously it's a lower tax rate. So if you put an ADU in, then that little spot is going to be like residential instead, so you'll see a higher tax rate, but you'd see the tax rate for residential for the house anyways.
I just have a question just to follow up on the previous one over there. When you mentioned as a home builder that you can build your own home, I'm wondering
through my understanding of the legislation and inquiries that I've done, if you build a home for somebody else, including a tiny home ADU, you need to be a licensed builder that's licensed through HCRA, and then the home potentially needs to be registered for Tarion through the warranty program. Because Tarion has split up several years ago. It's not just Tarion now, you kind of deal with HCRA for the licensing of the builder, and then it's just the Home Construction Regulatory Authority. And then for each build you get, you have to get a Tarion registration number for that build. Now, there's a whole bunch of exemptions. So I would really look through Tarion's website because there are exemptions for needing to be registered and needing to have a Tarion warranty. One of those is a true build for self. So if I'm building my own home, I do not need to be a licensed builder. I don't need to register for Tarion. If I'm working with an owner builder, like say you want to build your own home, but you're not an expert, you don't know how to frame, those kind of things, you could work with a consultant such as myself. We could work on a construction management contract where you're technically still the builder, but I'm giving you advice. I'm helping you arrange trades, those kind of things, but the trade contracts are direct with the owner. That technically wouldn't require Tarion. The other situation is, which is very applicable to models you see here at the show, or if you're building like a modular build, let's say that builder's not responsible for the installation of that build on your site, that's, say, subcontracted to a different company that's going to put in the foundation and services, things like that, that would not be subject to Tarion. And the reason is because that builder that's building that modular home isn't responsible for the overall construction process. They're only responsible for one part of it, a big part, like 90% of it maybe, but because it's not the whole thing, they're responsible for that. So to say you could very well be dealing with totally qualified, competent builders that don't have Tarion, that are building totally legal houses because they need to. And the big thing is it's really up to the consumer what their risk is, and if they value Tarion, if they value having a licensed builder. But the problem with that is there's extra costs. So a Tarion registration, they don't recognize like a tiny home or a 4,000 square foot home. Like there's still that same registration fee, which ultimately gets passed on to the end user. So it's kind of up to you if that's important to you or not.
Self-built home, if they're doing it with a partner, that being like a tiny builder, but they're not registered, you said that there has to be a certain percentage or something that the homeowner.
And maybe I'll clarify that is that if you're working with a builder that's maybe acting as a consultant, not a builder, as in the builder's not fully responsible for everything, like maybe you as the homeowner are taking some responsibility of the project. Maybe you're just going to, because you're home, maybe you're just going to make sure trades show up and like kind of be there if they have a question, maybe relay it to your consultant, but you have some involvement of the process. Then you would truly be an owner build, and you'd just be hiring a construction manager to help you with the process. And you write the checks to the plumber, to the framer, and it's going to be direct to those trades, not through the construction manager, not to the construction managers themselves. That would put it in the owner build status, not a hiring a builder. Hiring a builder would be on your like, hey, sweet builders, I'm going to hire you to build this ADU, start to finish, turnkey. Can you do that? And then you're just dealing with them. You don't even be there. You go to Florida for 6 months, come back to that house. That's a true builder situation. Or just like building a traditional home. You buy a home from Acme. They're a builder, they're registered, Tarion, warranty applies, all that stuff.
Yesterday were saying that if you don't have a Tarion certified builder, you have no recourse if they don't like business.
Legally, yes, that's correct. So legally, you would just be, question one is if anybody in here is what kind of recourse you have if you're not dealing with a Tarion builder, if they take some money and then go bankrupt or something like that. Because Tarion does have protections for those things like deposit protection, insurance, that kind of stuff. So that's why there's total advantages. I'm definitely not writing on like having a Tarion warranty, getting a Tarion no tearing on protection to help in that situation.
All right, we've got time for just one more question. Yeah.
So you mentioned the tiny house has to be built on like an industrial zoning area, and then for anyone like they don't have say the tiny house is built on farm or something, and how do you get the tiny house certified at the end? Like how do you go work with the city and to make sure this tiny house can be used?
Yep, great question. So to make sure I'm providing clarity so there's no misunderstanding, if you're building your own tiny house on your property, then you're just, if you're zoned to build it, you're fine. The industrial land comment was for the manufacturing of, running a factory to build multiple homes. So make sure that's clear. If you don't have that zoning in your municipality, it's not a permitted use for manufacturing. You know, some municipalities have, and there's only bylaws like home industry uses, things like that, where there might be an exemption there. But if you're a builder looking to set up a factory and build, I would just make sure you're building in an area that it's a permitted use to manufacture. It has nothing really to do with the certifying of a tiny home or anything like that. It is strictly just a separate zoning issue on the manufacturer. I hope that answers it. Maybe I can chat after if that wasn't totally clear.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. So we'll just give a quick round of applause for Justin. And the Ontario 20 Homes do have a booth. They're just outside the doors here. I believe your whole team's wearing caps. Yeah, so if you have other questions, you feel free to catch them just outside the doors here. Our next